My name is Genevieve Poppy, and I'm currently the administrator for ETNZ, but I've been working as a tech and a rigger in the industry since about 2006. As a female, I am no stranger to how hard we women have to work for a place in this industry, and I'm honored to be able to introduce Tana Douglas, who helped pave the way for us all. Throughout the music industry, Tana is acknowledged as rock and roll's first female roadie. Her journey started in 1973 in Australia, and within a year she was working for AC/DC, first doing backline, then front of house sound for the band. She then moved to lighting, working for a major Australian promoter, and completed in quick succession several tours with international acts such as Santana, Suzi Quatro, Neil Diamond, David Essex, Leo Sayer, Status Quo, all this before she turned 18. After getting her father to sign her passport so she could travel internationally, she ventured to London to start 4 years with Status Quo, running their lighting rig. She then brought that rig to Tasco, a major production company in London that until that time had only supplied sound for tours. A relationship developed there that would last several years and include working for such artists as Status Quo, The Who, Ozzy Osbourne, Whitesnake, The Police, Elton John, Iggy Pop, and Johnny Hallyday, the French megastar. Her relationship continued with Tasco, enabling her to transfer to the USA after they opened the Los Angeles division. After becoming a resident of the US, she broadened her working relationship to also include both delicate productions and light and sound designs. The tours that followed were Elton John, In Excess, and Men at Work, before once again being called back to Europe to manage the largest lighting rig ever built for a 7-month residency for French megastar Johnny Hallyday at Le Zénith in Paris for light and sound design. After successfully completing that task, it was time for a change. Los Angeles had offered Tana new passions, and she gradually left lighting and stage production to focus her skills on logistics, which meant that if a tour had to be somewhere, she was the person to make sure it happened. For everyone, including Lenny Kravitz, Pearl Jam, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Luther Vandross, Ice-T, and Ice Cube, to name a few. Tana's career spanned 30 plus years and has seen her work alongside some of rock's biggest names and personalities. As the music industry grew to become a worldwide cultural phenomenon, she was there, in the thick of it, a girl. Thanks, Tana.
Hi. Okay, good morning to everybody. Hi, my name, yes, indeed, is Tana Douglas, and I'd like to thank you for joining me here today. I'd also like to welcome you to ETNZ 2021. Let's get this conference started. So I was always going to be joining you via Zoom because I live in Los Angeles. So I now feel as though I'm with everybody else. So the thing to note about this is how quickly your presenters adapted to this change. They had, 24 hours notice. And this is what we do in this industry. We adapt in a very short amount of time. And we learn that very early in our careers. How to adapt, it's really important. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to focus my time with you today, talking about life on the road, how that is and how it was. So as you know, I see that as a major part of working in production. Now, I'll also, obviously, as mentioned, leave some time for a Q&A, and anything you might wish to know. If you have questions throughout, feel free to put them up, and Genevieve will let me know that you have a question for me. So I'll be focusing today on the music industry, as that was my chosen path. I do, however, acknowledge there's several other paths that can be taken. So that includes like theatre, opera, dance, film, not to exclude corporate events. I mean, those have developed into a worldwide phenomenon, massive budgets involved with those these days. Each of these paths I ventured onto. However, it was the music that kept calling me back. And I feel to choose a career on the production side of the music industry is still unique to these other avenues. So what I'd like to do today is to start this conversation. I just want to read a small passage from my book Loud. It's very quick, and I think it'll just set the mood for where we're going. So, a strange feeling has come over me. It's 6 in the morning as I pause to take it all in. Behind me, things are already loud, hectic, even chaotic to the untrained eye. There's a row of massive semi-trailers spewing their loads out onto the backstage area. It'll be okay for me to take just a moment while the rigger unloads his boxes. I usually let this feeling pass, as I'm not here to look, I'm here to work. This time feels special. It's a turning point in my career. How did I end up here on the most revered stage in the world's touring circuit? Beyond lies a vast, empty cavern shaking off the last tentacle of the night's mist. In a few short hours, there'll be 80,000 punters here, paying homage to their musical heroes, while being transported to rock and roll heaven as only a great live show can do. In this time of dramatic change in the music industry, finally, the road crew are coming into their own and being recognised for their skill sets. This crew here today is considered amongst the best. And here I stand, the only woman in that crew. When you can sell out London's Wembley Stadium, you've made it. When you work for the band that accomplishes that feat, you've also made it. Not bad for a girl who started out as a 15-year-old runaway in Brisbane, Australia. It's August 1979. I've been in London 3 years. I'm lucky enough to have worked for 2 of the 4 bands on the bill. Today, I'm working for The Who. But there was a time not so long ago that I worked for AC/DC, way back in the beginning in Australia, when we were all just getting started. It's going to be a long, hard day, but I already know it will be worth it when The Who and friends roar in. Plus, I get to reminisce with my old friends in AC/DC. These are the kind of things that keep us, the crew, coming back. The bonds we build among ourselves and the bands we work for. There's only one thing a band member relies on as much as his bandmates, and that's his roadies. They're there 24/7 for them, and they know it. Lifelong friendships are made in this industry of music, and if it doesn't kill you, it's one hell of a way to make a living. So that's the preface to my book, and I decided on reading that section as it sets a scene for what likely lays ahead should this become your chosen career. So there'll be moments throughout where you have those aha moments when you realize something big's happening, and it's exciting, and it spurs you on. For me, that's there, standing on that stage at Wembley Stadium, that was an aha moment. Now, the last sentence also that I just read for you, if it doesn't kill you, it's one hell of a way to make a living. That still rings true today also, but we'll get to that. But Wembley Stadium is obviously not where it all began for me. I, like everyone else, had to work my way up through the trenches. And that's a really important part of this journey, is where you start and how you handle yourself in the very beginning and how you go about learning and expanding the knowledge that is given to you. So it was 1979. I'd already been a roadie for several years when I found myself there on that stage in London, England. Now, my career had started in Australia very early on in my life. I'd run away from home, yes, and I had a childhood where I just could see no future. There was no future in my life. It was not a good childhood, and I just had to get away. And this brought my education to a screeching halt at the age of 15. You know, my chosen destination that I decided to run to was a music festival in Australia called the Nimbin Aquarius Festival of Music and Arts. It was 1973. I was 15 years old. Now, there, I encountered a group of people that I found fascinating. There was live music being played everywhere, and for the first time, I felt I'd found my tribe. I'd not come from a musical family. It's not necessary. I believe music will find you. Now, amongst that tribe was a French tightrope walker, Philippe Petit. I gravitated towards his group and ended up accompanying them down to Sydney after the festival was finished. The reason was to put on a traffic stopping event above the Sydney Harbour Bridge. We were to rig a wire, as it's called, meaning a steel cable, across the 2 towers that straddle the north end of the bridge, and Philippe would walk across it. So we got our hands on the blueprints for the bridge to show us where we could attach the rigging points. There were multiple trips backwards and forwards to the bridge under the cover of darkness to drop off equipment in different towers, different times, different things as we found them. You know, we didn't have any of the equipment that we needed to put on this event. He hadn't bought any of this equipment from France with him. So we went around scrap metal yards, finding bits and pieces that we could put together to make this event. And it was fabulous. Everything from his balance pole to O-rings to metal plates that we could use as bases, everything we just scavenged. And we did it all without anybody knowing what we were up to. So it was really quite a fascinating thing. And without knowing it, I was becoming part of a production team. From that day on, I had a taste for that lifestyle, a taste that I haven't lost to this day. And yes, it is a lifestyle. And if you aren't prepared for that, then just maybe, you may decide that life on the road is not for you. There's plenty of other positions that don't require you to go on the road. So don't give up just yet. From this experience, though, I acquired a fascination with everything production. So within a few short weeks, an opportunity came along for me to get involved with working for a band. I jumped at it. I felt I'd finally found the family that I'd been searching for all my life. That feeling's a strong enabler, and it's kept me going time and time again when things have gotten tough. So what I'd like to do is take you on a bit of a journey back through the years. So, from the formative years of this industry. I can't talk to the 60s, I'm not that old, thank God, but I'll be starting at my beginning, which was the early 70s, and with the view of showing you the evolution of both the music industry and the people that molded it. So you'll hear me using the term roadies throughout. Now, this is a term that's developed a bit of a stigma to it over the decades, and I feel a bit nostalgic about that. I think it's a bit of a shame, really, as in the beginning, that's what we all were, roadies, and we all did everything. The job descriptions were only starting to be formed, and the size of the crews were only starting to grow. So the term roadies to me was before we became crew, before we became the road crew, and long before we became technical departments. So, an example of this is when I first started working with the band AC/DC. I was their only crew member. That was it, me. They weren't completely a band yet. There was only 3 members. There was the 2 young brothers, Malcolm and Angus, and Bon Scott, the original singer. So what we did, though, is they were recording their first album. So they were backwards and forwards between Melbourne and Sydney. And what we were doing was looking for a drummer and a bass player. So, we eventually got all 5 members in place, but still I was the only crew member. And then we'd start doing shows. So, it was easy when it was just production, doing rehearsals and things like that. I could definitely handle all that. Once we started doing shows, though, I wasn't old enough to have a full license. So we had to get someone to drive a truck and also to help, load in with some of the equipment, because they had a lot of equipment even back then. So, I get different people to help out, on show days. And eventually that crew, when we started doing many, many shows a week, that crew grew to a 3 or 4 man crew. But it took time. So when I started with them, I was doing backline. So my first job in the industry was doing backline as a stage roadie. So I was looking after all of the stage equipment, instruments, all the instruments, and of course, Bon Scott, the lead singer. And what that meant at the time was you needed to be adept in all the instruments and equipment used on your stage. Then when we got a PA, that was when I started doing sound. There was no training. The band decided that was what they wanted, so that is what happened. I had to learn as I went along. The benefit I have over someone else, like someone who was actually an experienced sound engineer, was having had worked so closely with the band up until that time. I knew what they wanted sound-wise, so that was a big help. What I had to learn how to do was how to make it happen, how to get that sound. And that's what I did. So, it was a bit like the Wild West back then. There were rules, but somehow they didn't really apply to us. It wasn't unheard of to do 12, 14 shows in a week, all in different locations, all at least a 1 hour set, sometimes multiple sets. That can mean 3 or 4 different venues in one night. And that can be taxing on both the band and the crew alike. And that's where the camaraderie comes in. We survived it together. And camaraderie is a huge part of this job, and it still is to this day. And it's because of the circumstances we find ourselves in out there on the road. Sleep was a luxury. Having a chance to grab something to eat was a luxury. Being able to shower after a show, that was non-existent. You ate and you slept wherever and whenever you could. And this was where the fraternity started, the fraternity of the road crew. This is where it began. So if you're too tired, you're too hungry, You can't let someone else do your job because they're just as tired and just as hungry. So you all pull together. And likewise, you can't fall behind and leave your work to someone else. You depend on each other strongly to get through the day. And then the show, and then the adrenaline from the show would get you through the loadout. There was no security and there were no stagehands. You know, occasionally there'd be some guy hanging out at the backstage door and he'd offer to give you a hand if he could stay in and watch the show for free. But you just knew they weren't going to be there for the loadouts. So, you know, what little help you could get, you took, you know, and getting paid. I mean, that was a luxury back then. I joke not, you know, I mean, when I first started with AC/DC, both the band and myself were getting paid a flat $60 a week. And we all lived together in a house that was paid for by the management. So we really didn't have that many expenses. So back then it wasn't such a bad deal, but you don't always get to live with the band you work for. And I believe that's what formed the close bond that I still feel to this day with AC/DC. They also taught me their strong work ethic, which is also what I believe has driven them to the success that they have achieved. A work ethic, a strong work ethic is everything. It's so important. Even in those early days, they were destined for success with that. There was just something about them. You could tell they weren't going away. And I put that down to Malcolm Young's vision of what the band was going to be and where it was going, because he had that vision from day one, you know, and he is sorely missed, you know. I stayed with AC/DC from 1974 and 1975. And when they took time off to go in the studio to record their second album, TNT, as I was doing front of house, there was no reason for me to be in the studio. And I've always felt as a female self-conscious putting myself in a position where I'm not really doing anything. I'm just there. You know, I just always feel that can be misinterpreted. So I chose that time to leave the band. I knew I needed to learn more. And if I was going to make this my choice as a career, I'd take this opportunity and find someone who could teach me. You know, it's really important that you put your career first and learn as much as you can along the way. Loyalty to the band you work for is important. However, it cannot get in the way of your career. You know, they're not necessarily going to be there when you need them. You know, your career will be. So within a matter of a few weeks, I started working for the #1 promoter in Australia at the time. It's a chap called Paul Dainty, still a major promoter today. And being the only female in the industry, not having a job was not an option for me. I couldn't take any downtime. I had a constant awareness of being the only female out there, and I was not willing to lose my place at the table. I'd gotten great momentum from working with AC/DC. I'd worked really hard, so I wasn't going to let that slip. So Dainty was the first promoter to have his own production company, a company called ACT. You know, that started with a band called Blood, Sweat and Tears, which was an American band. And they brought their own PA system to Australia with them for their tour. But they decided after the tour that it was too expensive to send it back to America. You know, and it wasn't just any system, though. It was a Clare Brothers system. And that was a big deal back then. I mean, it still is today. They're considered a top provider of sound and production worldwide. You know, Dainty saw this as a strategic step in cornering the international touring market, as bands would prefer to use a sound system that they were familiar with over one that they weren't. Still how it is to this day. To complete his production package, under the advice of a fellow named Ron Blackmore, who would become his production manager, he also purchased a lighting system, and that enabled him to offer a complete package. Now, all this equipment needed was a crew to maintain and operate it. That's where I went. Not to continue doing sound, but to start my career in lighting. It didn't matter to me. I didn't really care what I was doing. I just wanted to keep doing it. You know, there was a lot of experienced sound guys out there, but lighting was still new. So that I felt leveled the playing fields. The choices you make are important, and change can be a good thing. Don't be scared of change, and don't be scared to make a decision that you feel can be advantageous to you. Just, you need to look after yourself and you need to think that way. So what was important was that I'd be learning from the best crew members that both Australia and New Zealand had to offer. And that was the most important thing to me. It was more important whether I did sound or lights. I didn't care, you know, and we became the primo production crew in Australia. So I'd found a wonderful place to land. And within a very short amount of time, you know, I toured with the likes of Susie Quattro, David Essex, Status Quo, Carlos Santana, Neil Diamond. Now, depending on your age, those names will mean something different to you and probably something different to your parents. But at the time, they were all at the top of their game. So that experience was invaluable. What I also learned at that time was if you did a good job, you got referred to other tours. That was how I ended up doing the Neil Diamond tour. Carlos Santana's American tour manager, he referred me to work directly for Neil's American crew, as they had a position that needed filling. Now, when this offer was made, I didn't hesitate. I said yes, I jumped at it. I didn't even ask what the job was. It turns out, I probably should have asked, but it turns out it was to be in charge of the constructing a roof for the outdoor shows. There were many of those on that tour. The roof was called the Mighty Mobius. What a disaster. It was, at the time, it was way ahead of any other sort of overhead support system for lighting out there. But it was a beast. It really was a beast. I refer to it as the ugly stepsister of the roofs we have today. But, you know, what you've got to realize is it all has to start somewhere. You know, and due to the pioneering efforts and ingenuity of these roadies back then, that's where the outdoor festivals of today started. It's also where the lighting rigs of today sprang from. You know, as we created better systems for attaching lights around, above the stage, across the stage, beside the stage, there was a stronger need for more and more varied types of lights. So that expanded also the repertoire of what we could offer for effects, visual effects, for the artists that came to the country. So now, you know, when I say lighting system back then, don't get too excited. It was a different animal, a very different animal, you know, and however, it was a beast that fed itself. And no sooner had we developed like hydraulic genie towers, you know, the standard thing was you'd have one on stage left, one on stage right, down stage, then you'd have a couple upstage as well, you know, either side of the drummer or whatever, you know. And once we realized that we could position these around and maybe we could like put, you know, pipes between them and hang additional lighting off. And then we realized we could do reinforced long runs of piping into ladder beams, then trussing to cross over the stages. You know, we were using things like manual hoists, block and falls, you know, even winch systems, ground support winch systems from factory work situations. You know, we stole ideas from everywhere. Nothing was out of bounds. You know, not everything worked. It was trial and error. And the mantra of the day was trial and error. You know, we quickly realized though, the thing that was holding us back was the weight of all of this equipment, the steel lighting instruments, the support system, you know, the steel pipes, everything. So all of a sudden it was like, welcome to the world of aluminum. Hallelujah. This was the game changer. It was totally the game changer. Now, while all of this was going on, I decided that there was a whole world out there and I just needed to see it. So I decided to pack up and move to England. Not that I had much to pack. It definitely is a Bedouin lifestyle. And you need to adapt to it quickly or it's not going to work for you. You know, I left Australia with a one-way ticket. I know I had at least $100. I might have had a couple of $100 in my pocket. Oh, and of course the passport that my father had to sign because I wasn't old enough on my own, you know, but I just couldn't wait. I'd had a taste of it working for these international bands and I decided I wanted to go and see where all this stuff was coming from. You know, I just knew there was a whole world out there and I was not going to miss out, you know. It wasn't easy. And basically by changing countries, moving to England, I had to start all over again. I knew this going in and I was determined to not fail. You know, in this industry, failure is not acceptable. You know, that can put a lot of pressure on a person. So determination can be a strong asset in this line of work. You know, I also reverted to my history of being able to do backline, sound, lighting. So I'd pick up work wherever and whenever I could. I had no pride. I would just do whatever it took to get work because I needed to eat. You know, that was the bottom line. You know, so, you know, there was stress. There was a lot of stress and there is a lot of stress in this industry, you know, but over the years, I've learned how to manage that. I wish I'd learned it sooner, but it really wasn't an option back then. You know, you just roll with whatever was thrown at you, you'd make it happen, and you'd do it quickly. Those were pretty much the rules. They were the only rules there were, you know. This is where the hard lifestyle, drinking and partying came into play. You know, you needed to shake off that pressure. You needed to be able to overcome the adrenaline from the show and sleep eventually. You know, these times, the socializing times, became almost as important as the show times, as these were the times that bonded us, the bands and the crews, together. So I found myself closing out the 70s decade, living and working in the UK, and I'd landed with the band Status Quo. Now, I had toured with them in Australia, and what happened was they were in the process of purchasing a lighting rig that they were having built from scratch. So what I did is I went into the company that was doing that, and I signed on and became the person who was doing all the wiring, all the building, all the fabrication, everything that needed doing. I was right there in the thick of it. So when this rig was completed, they looked at me and they said, well, we already know her. She's already toured with us. She knows that rig inside and out. She'd be a good fit on the road. So from that opportune moment, we toured pretty much nonstop for 4 years, bam, with that lighting rig. So the lesson here is the task of building a lighting rig from scratch wasn't as glorious as if I just leapt straight out on a tour somewhere, but it evolved into a 4-year stint with the band, an in-depth knowledge of every part of that rig, lifelong friendships, and all of that to me is more valuable than a quick hit with the tour. And from that job, after we'd done the 4 years and the band finally took a break, we were exhausted. The band finally took a break. But what I did was I took that lighting rig and I took it to a production company called Tasco in England, in London. And they were just a sound company then. They were a really impressive sound company and very successful, but they'd never bothered with lighting. So what I did was we offered to lease them that lighting rig from the band Status Quo. We'd lease it to Tasco, and then, just like back in Australia with Paul Dainty, they could offer a complete package. So it filled a gap, a void in what they were missing. And out of that, I became the head of their lighting department because I created it. It was pretty much a no-brainer. So, the way things fall in place, it's all about decisions that you make. Some people go, oh, wow, that was lucky. Well, it wasn't. It was a lot of hard work, but it was good. Overall, it was a great move, and from that time on, I've always worked for production companies. While it's great working for a band directly, but I like the freedom of choosing which tour to go out on next. For me, it gets a little bit all-consuming at times working for a band. Others love it. They only want to work directly for a band. Me, I kind of like a little bit of distance, but that's just my personal taste, So, right at this time, this is when the industry was kicking into high gear, and there was development of all sorts of new equipment. It was turning into a big business. People were realizing if they spent a little bit of money, invested a little bit of money on the production side, there was big money to be made, big recourse from that. People would pay to see a production. So this was a new thing. So several types of new lights were being used, color changes were being created, dimmer racks were completely reinvented, along with the consoles to operate them from. Motors were adapted to run upside down to enable them to fly systems, both sound and lighting. Follow spots were an integral part of the show. And all this time, there were 2 guys working in a shed in Texas who were the guys who created the first moving lights, and that would evolve into Very Lights. So all of this was hitting at the same time. It was a wonderful time to be working in lighting. I loved it. Didn't matter that we were the first in and the last out. There was pride in watching the audience's reaction to the show that we put on night after night. That was the reward. And the feeling of having accomplished something special. It was really, a good payback. There was a huge payback in that. So as we moved into the 80s, everything kicked into high gear. There was no stopping it. We were no longer taking our cues from the theatre world. We no longer hid the lighting source behind drapes. That was theatre. That was old. That was gone. We threw all the drapes away. We exposed the trusses. We lit the trusses. We made silver park hands. Everything could be lit. Everything became a part of the show. It all became a feature, you know, and the follow spot operators were up those trusses, moving trusses. What safety advice were they given? Hold on. That was it. Hold on, you know. So there still wasn't any OSHA type compliance for health and safety. That was a ways off yet, you know. There was no one taking care of the well-being of the crew. And there were like really detrimental fallbacks from that. You know, for example, you know, one night I was working in one of the other main venues in London, which was the Wembley Empire pool. And that was an old pool. It was an Olympic swimming pool that they covered over and then they'd made it into an arena type venue. But, you know, the thing with that was that's all they'd done. You know, there was still huge pools of water below the stage. Downstairs, underneath the level below, which it was actually the bottom of the empty pool, which was where they made us set up our dimmer racks and our three-phase power, there was water everywhere. It was, you know, it was mind-boggling. It was just mind-boggling. So we're there one night and we're doing the last of 3 sold-out shows there. And we've got a show the next day in Birmingham. So it's an overnight drive straight to the load-in. And what happens? We lose our rigger. He falls out of the roof. You know, now that's a really sad moment, but it's also, what do? We don't have time to stop. You know, there was no, like I say, no health and safety. So what happens is I have to first run downstairs, shut down all my power because I was going into the roof to finish de-rigging the system because we needed those steel cables. We had to have them for the next day. We needed the shackles, we needed the cables, we needed the steels, we needed the span sets, we needed all of it. And it was like, what are we going to do? So next thing I find myself, that's the lighting designer and myself, we're up in the grid and we're in the exact same spot that he just fell from. And we're pulling these steels, we're undoing shackles, we're stealing whatever we can reach, whatever we can get to, whatever we can de-rig. And the whole time you're looking down at the stage and there's the rigger lying there waiting for an ambulance. You know, that's how it was. It wasn't that we didn't care for him. We did. We couldn't move him because we didn't know how badly he was injured. So we'd set him, we'd protected him, we put everything around him to protect him, but we couldn't move him. So we had to work around him. We had to finish the loadout like that. So, you know, no one went straight to sleep after that loadout. You know, we quietly toasted our fallen crew member. But then, you know, as the alcohol started doing its job, we're hurtling down the freeway in the tour bus to the next show. We filled with a weird sort of bravado. You know, that will never happen to me. You say that to yourself and you know it's just not true. You have to be careful. You have to be very careful. You know, I mean, it happened to me, different. You know, my time came during my 3rd tour with Elton John. You know, we were back in the UK. We just completed a successful US tour of the States. And what happens? I'm electrocuted, 3-phase, 200 amps, bam. The shock should have killed me, but as luck would have it, no permanent injury. You know, it was, there was some weird side effects. Like I couldn't put my arms down. They were sort of halfway sticking out at my sides and I couldn't feel them at all. And someone could actually push them down by my side, but if they let go, they'd come back up again on their own. So that was really weird. I couldn't talk. My mouth was just, I just couldn't put the words together. It was so strange. And it felt like my whole head was wrapped in cotton wool and everything, my ears, my nose, my mouth was just jam-packed with cotton wool or something. It just had that weird pressure feeling to it. That's the best way I can explain it, you know. So, you know, what did they do? You know, did they take me to the hospital? No. They put me in a bunk on the bus and came and checked on me 3 hours later. You know, God knows I could have been dead, you know? But that's how it was, you know. So luckily now there are you know, things enforced, safety terms that are needed, that are followed, guidelines that are met, and that helps protect us from ourselves, if nothing else, you know. I was 24 years old And that's when my hair started going grey, you know. So my hair gets the brunt of all my issues, actually, in case you haven't noticed. So, you know, I guess it's right. If it doesn't kill you, it does make you stronger, you know. So, you know, the chances of having a serious accident on a show is just slightly higher than being involved in a plane crash, you know, which is fine until it's your turn. So, you know, should we all be suffering for PTSD from the accumulation of instances that we've witnessed back then? From, you know, there was a time where there was several plane crashes back to back. You know, there's trusses falling, road accidents, stages collapsing, electrocution. You know, the list goes on. You know, the answer to that question is yes. You know, we do suffer from these things, and we do suffer long term. You know, but, you know, we're all alpha types, so we tend to hide it, you know, which is not always the way to go, you know. And, you know, back then it was, you know, I will say it was worse, you know, and I will say that because I've experienced it back then and I've experienced it now. So I think I can say that with some sort of authority. And I think it was really down to, you know, the lack of communication that there was outside of being on this tour. You know, you're on a tour. So like in the 70s, there was marriages were falling apart, families were falling apart, people were suffering from depression. You know, I mean, this was the 70s, 80s also. You know, it started to ease off a little bit in the 90s and then it picked up again. So, you know, I think with the, you know, invention of emails, mobile phones, you know, Skype, Zoom, whatever it is, like we're talking today, communication over the internet, that's helped, you know, and that I think has really helped the rate of casualties, you know, in not only relationships, but also, you know, professionally. You know, so I think that's really important. You know, it's always important to communicate, you know, and if it's something that you don't feel is right, then talk about it, ask advice, make a suggestion, something like that. You know, there's tools out there now, and there's touring schedules that help alleviate some of this. And there's also organizations like there's Support Act, there's Crew Care, and there's Roadie for Roadies, which, by the way, started in New Zealand. You know, and all of these are valuable, you know, so use them, you know. So
We've had a
let me
question come
see.
through, Tana.
Okay, yes.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, not at all.
We've had a question come through from Nick, and it's, if you could give young Tara one bit of advice, what would it be?
If
young
I could
Tana,
give who?
one bit of advice.
Oh, young
Tana,
Tana.
one bit of advice.
Run. Run, don't look back. No, let me see. I mean, obviously, you know, there's a ton of things that I could have done better. I could have managed my career better. I could have taken time for myself. I never took time for myself. And that's kind of what I'm alluding to right now. You need to take time for yourself. You need to be healthy. You need to be healthy physically. I was always healthy physically. You need to be strong mentally. You need to be healthy mentally. You know, so if you can find, you know, some sort of outlet. I mean, I would go horse riding on days off, but, you know, it wasn't always available. And I would swim. I'm a swimmer. I still swim to this day. I swim a mile. I'm happy. You know, it makes me feel good. It's my zen. You know, so, but I would just say to focus more on those things with your downtime, you know, to be a bit kinder to yourself on your days off. I think that's what I would suggest to myself in the past.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. So, yeah. So, meanwhile, we're back in the 80s. And what did the 80s do? The 80s set the bar really high. You know, bands like Pink Floyd with their visual effects, The Who being christened the loudest band in the world, it started a challenge in both sound and lighting where everybody just wanted to jump in. Everyone wanted to be that band, you know, so it was a truly wonderful time in the industry. And, you know, as long as you didn't need sleep to function, you were fine. The good news was now there was catering for the crew and you could shower at a loadout. Don't laugh. These things were huge helps. They really were, you know. So it was around this time, you know, mid-80s, that I transferred to the United States. You know, I finished my last Elton John tour and started working for Tasco in Los Angeles. Same production company, but in Los Angeles. So I got to the mid-80s and another company that I'd done some work with, Light and Sound Design, which is now PRG. So they're a worldwide company, you know, well-known, well-established. they asked me to go back to Paris and do this residency with Johnny Halliday. You know, I'm not sure if any of you guys have heard of him, probably not, but huge megastar. And I mean, the Zenith venue is, I think, a 6,000 seater, and that was sold out for 7 months. So that gives you an idea of how popular the person was. We did 6 shows a night. We had Monday off, but we did 6 shows a night. 6 shows a week, and for 7 months sold out. Ridiculous. So anyway, it was quite the production and quite the challenge, which is why I took the job. I also toured with him a couple of times when I was based in London, you know, but this was going to be a whole different thing. And once again, we were building the system for this show. So everything was going to be brand new. Everything was built specifically for the show, because we knew that the money we were making from it would more than pay for it. And then we'd have this whole other system that we could, you know, rent out, lease out to other bands and things, you know. So, you know, it was huge. It was the biggest lighting rig that had ever been built. And what it consisted of was 3,000 car cans. There was 60 Very Lights. There was 10 5K Fresnels, 20 follow spots, 2,500 feet of meters, of trussing. There was 200 rigging points, and 98 of those were moving parts. So 98 of those points moved throughout the show. So it was huge. It was huge. It was quite the production and quite the challenge. My job for that show was looking after the dimmers that kept the show going and all of the control aspect. And the patch, which was a manual patch in those days, the patch for that lighting rig was all in my head. It's a lot of memory to take up. I was quite proud of that as well. Plus it was job security. So they couldn't bring someone else in because no one else knew what they were doing. So it was kind of handy to keep it in my head. I'd always make a joke, so make sure I don't get hit by a bus. So anyway, so those are the sort of things that, you know, you get called all over the world in this job. And some of the jobs are more, you know, some of them are more a personal challenge, and some of them are just aesthetics. You just want to work for that band. You know what I mean? You just want to be seen working for that band. There's a lot of that, you know. I tended to stay away from that side of it. I was more into the challenge side, always wanting to learn stuff, you know. But that gets me to the point of, what about the bands, you know? I mean, throughout all of this, let's not forget the bands and the artists. I mean, they are, after all, you know, the ones that, you know, are paying for all this deep down. So, you know, and it depends really, you know, where they're at in their careers and even their personal lives. You know, any of this can affect how enjoyable that experience is and how much interaction even there is between a crew and a band. You know, sometimes less is more, you know. And I always remind people, especially new members of a crew, that if they're there to work. That's your main goal. You're there to work. Anything else is just icing on the cake. So, you know, no matter how much time you spend socializing with the band, they are your employer, and you need to respect that. You know, don't try to keep up. They're much better funded than us, the crew. Trust me on that one. And the mistake is often made that, you know, if you're invited to something, that's great, but never just show up. You know, never jeopardize your crew call and never jeopardize your job. Doesn't matter what they say. You know, you're there to work. You know, I mean, an example of that, not jeopardizing my job, but an example of being close to a particular artist. You know, I did a tour with Iggy Pop, you know, back in '79. Now, if I'd been smart, I had 3 weeks off between 2 different legs of the same tour. So we'd just come back into England. I had 3 weeks off, and then we were getting on a plane and leaving to start the next leg of the tour. So any sane person would have slept for a couple of days, maybe a week, you know, ate really well, you know, relaxed, you know, maybe socialized a little bit, you know, caught up with friends you haven't seen for a year because you've been out on the road, you know. But I decided the best thing to do was go straight back out on tour, go on a tour that gave me 1 day off between the end of that and when I had to get on the plane to the scheduled tour I was already on. But that's how it was. I worked nonstop, and it made me happy. I liked it. I liked working. If I wasn't working, I was restless. I was sort of edgy. So it was better to just keep working, you know. And I think that was a bit and insecurity of being a female, because still there was just starting to show up females. Like the only other female I ever toured with was actually an Australian girl who came over to England with a good friend of mine, who's a New Zealander, a guy called Mary Took. And they both arrived in London. And so I put Mary, who's a lighting guy, I put him out on Neil Young tour. And then it was like, well, what are we going to do with Debbie Vincent? And it's like, he's like, she's a lighting girl too. She's good. So I'm great, you know. So I took her out in Elton John with me. It was the first and unfortunately the only time I ever toured with another female. But it was great. You know, it was a great thing to do. So, you know, I really enjoyed it. But getting back to Iggy Pop. So there I am, 3 weeks tour with Iggy Pop. Now, my job on that tour was stage manager, head of lighting, and I had to wrangle Iggy. I had to make sure that someone knew where he was at all times, that he wasn't getting in too much trouble, and that everything was good, everything was how he wanted it on the stage, you know, keep him happy. So, you know, he'd just come to a point where he'd had a fight with his best mate, David Bowie. You know, he thought Bowie was going to be on the tour with him. They just toured together before. His last tour was with Bowie. They'd just done 2 albums together, but they'd had a falling out. So Iggy was beside himself. All he wanted was his mate David back. So he was getting in all sorts of trouble and he was being quite difficult. So, you know, we got to Berlin 2 weeks into the tour, which is where both he and David lived. And he was just hoping David would appear at one of the shows. Didn't happen. So, you know, he's in a bad mood. You know, we get to England, saving grace. We've got 3 sold out shows. Got to make you happy. At the Music Machine in Camden in London, brilliant venue, perfect for a punk band, couple of thousand people a night, good to go. So we're there, first show, ready to start. I make my way out front, getting ready, talking to the follow spot operators, getting them queued up and ready for the show. And the house lights go out, which is what's meant to happen. Then all of a sudden, over the intercom, Tana, you need to come backstage now. Iggy's in the dressing room. He wants to talk to you. What? No, this isn't how it's meant to work. We're supposed to be coming to the stage, you know, and I'm like, no, he's got to go on. The house lights are out. He's not leaving. He will not leave his dressing room. You've got to come now. So here's me fighting my way through 2,000 punk rockers. I get dragged up onto the stage. They finally find me. They drag me up. I go running upstairs. Meanwhile, through all of this, I've got my leather jacket on. So it's one of those leather jackets that every punk rock fanatic would want. Everyone wants this jacket, including Iggy. He'd been asking me all tour, can he wear it on stage? My answer was no, never. So anyway, I'm not going to go into what happened in the dressing room. It's in the book Loud. I'm not going to go into it here. It was quite funny. But anyway, I finally get him out of the dressing room. David's there. David Bowie's turned up, so thank God. So I finally drag him down to the stage and it's like, right. So I take my jacket off because I'm just dying at this point from heat exhaustion. So I shove it under the monitor desk thinking it'll be safe there. And I dive into the audience again and start fighting my way back to the front of house position. Got the headsets on. I can hear the band starting on stage. I'm not facing the stage though. I'm looking at the follow spot operators. I'm trying to quieten everyone down. Everyone's talking. It's like, turn off your mics. You've got to stop. I've got the 2 spots already on Iggy, so that gives me a little bit of time to bring the other guys up to speed. So then this guy's talking through the intercom again. And it's like, what are you doing? Turn your microphone off. He goes, oh man, what a shame. You should see Iggy just lost his leather jacket into the audience. And so I turn around just in time to see the arm of my leather jacket slink off the front of the stage. It's like, I'll kill him. So these are the things that bands can do when they get close to you and they think that they have rights, or, you know, or you think that you have rights with them. It's a blurred line is the point I'm trying to make, you know. So I lost my leather jacket. I told him no. Why did he do it? You know, maybe he was feeling good. He got his good buddy David back. He got a new jacket for the night and it was heavier than his jacket. So I think when he threw it, it just landed wrong. Did he mean to throw it so it got stolen? I don't think so. Did that matter at the time? Hell no. I was furious. So, you know, I got through the next 2 shows. I never spoke to him again, you know. So I ran into him at a Lollapalooza and I spoke to him there, but that was 20 years later or something, 15 years later, you know. So I did hold a grudge, I've got to admit. But, you know, different bands, you know, different things. I mean, Pearl Jam, totally different thing. You know, we just finished Lollapalooza. Straight after Lollapalooza, we're going to the Hawaiian Islands. Now, normally a band will go to Hawaii. They'll play one show in Honolulu or a couple of nights in Honolulu, and that's it. But Pearl Jam, they're surfers. They love to surf. So what do? They go, we're going to play every island. Why? So they could surf every island. Did they need to take me to Hawaii? No, I was doing logistics at the time. Really, I wasn't needed, you know, but they invited me. They said, come on, you've got to come. Bring all your gear, you've got to come. So what did I get? I got a paid vacation surfing all the islands in Hawaii. So it can go from one extreme to the other. You know what I mean? So, you know, that's how it is. So you just got to sort of judge it carefully and tread gently with these people, you know. So what else have we got here? Where does that end us up? We're in the 90s now. Okay, so the 90s are all leveling out in the size of productions. You know, this I put down to the fact that accountants all of a sudden became a fixture on tour. This removed the creative control away from most of the artists, even the designers, and placed it firmly with the money man. You know, managers and accountants were now, even promoters got involved, you know. It did, however, usher in the use of video screens. So the 90s were good for something, which is now a large part of most major touring things. So, you know, they created an entire new department in our industry. So that's great. You know, I trace that back to Pink, but again, both Pink Floyd for their cutting edge technology always, and U2's Zoo TV tour. You know, they did that tour as a dig at the oversaturation of technology. Seems to have backfired because everybody who went to that show wanted that. Every artist that went said, I want that for my next show. So look where we are now. They created a sub-industry within an industry, you know. So, you know, and the 21st century itself seems to have just sort of evolved into a price gouging extravaganza, you know. Don't know what to say about that at all, you know. And then suddenly what happens? It's all stopped. So where does this leave us now in this new and unusual time of COVID? Well, it's going to be different when we eventually come back. I think there's going to be several false starts. I personally believe there'll be an adjustment, and that's going to be governed by the economy, access to travel, and also by making tours sustainable. You know, these things are all going to be dominating factors, and the promoters are going to be holding the purse strings as we come out of this. So a lot of this is going to be down to them. I don't necessarily like that position. I can see it negatively affecting both production and crewing of tours. You know, there'll be a happy ending though, and I believe this industry will correct itself eventually. It just may take time. You know, my advice for now is diversify. You know, I believe the crew members that are capable of more than one field, they're the ones that'll be hired first. You know, for all those coming out of school, graduating into an industry that doesn't clearly exist on the world stage at the moment, I say this, don't panic. Use it to your advantage. Use the time to get your foot in the door at any and all production outlets, whether it's a production company, a venue, a church, a club. Be creative and be dogmatic. It will pay off. You know, and the good news for people just starting out in this industry is there's an estimated 40% or higher number of experienced crew that have left the industry due to the COVID shutdown. Most of those will not be returning. This provides an opportunity, so take it. You know, and the other thing that I really want to share with you is this: have fun, because if it's not fun, it's just not worth it. So that's it from me. I don't know if we have time for a Q&A still. Hopefully we do. How are we doing here?
We've got a couple minutes left. Does anybody in the room have any questions they'd like to ask Tana? You can speak to her yourself if you'd like, or pop them up there. I can read them aloud. In the meantime, while you're writing your questions, just a reminder that we do have a couple of copies of Tana's book. So if you want to be in to win a copy, just email your name to me at etnz.admin@gmail.com. So it's etnz.admin@gmail.com. And just put in that it's for Tana's book in the subject line. And yeah, we'll get in touch with you guys following the conference, whoever's won the books. Anybody have any additional questions?
Okay.
No, it doesn't look
Hi,
like.
yeah, hi Sam. I see you. I see you there in the chat. So I'm
Oh.
glad you got the book. I'm glad you're reading it. Thank you. And I hope you enjoy it. And you know, it was my pleasure to do this. I was really happy when I was invited to do this. It was sad that we couldn't do it in person, but it's a sign of the times, and I think that we're all used to it now, so it doesn't really matter. Whether we're there personally or whether we're online, we can still do the same things. So don't ever let it hold you back. Just roll with it. You've got to adapt. Just always remember, adapt. I think that's the best advice I can give you. So what else have we got?
I've just seen another
Would
one
you-
up there. Sorry, I didn't have that screen before. Would you let your kids into the industry if they're interested, or would you rather they do something else for a living?
That's a tough one. So many people, there's so many like second generation kids out there now, which is a great thing. I actually think it's great. Not all of them, you're surprised though, some people who are just hardcore production people and their kids have no interest, no interest whatsoever. And others, their kids love it, and they're tour managing themselves, or, they're electricians or they're lighting people. And the good thing is that if it's a second generation person coming into the industry, we all look after them and we all train them, as if they're our own, So yes, I'd feel, 100% comfortable with that, because I know that there's a lot of good people in the industry who look out for them. Yeah.
Excellent. Cool. There's one more similar vein. If it was a 15-year-old daughter to run away and join an AC/DC tour.
Well, I mean, how could I say no? I did it myself. I wouldn't want to know. I wouldn't want to know. At the time, I'd be a nervous wreck. But, how can I say no? That'd be a little bit contrary, wouldn't it? It's okay for me, but not for someone else. I couldn't say that, I'm afraid. So I'd have to say yes. Be a nervous wreck, but I'd have to say yes.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
That seems to be it, I think. So yeah, thank you so much for coming. It's been great getting to finally meet you, and yeah, thank you for.
It's my pleasure. Yeah, and I just want to thank the people who actually attended. That was great of you. Thank you so much, and I hope you learned something. Because that's what it's all about. It's all about passing on knowledge. So, and remember that with your own careers, it's not knowledge unless you share it. So share it. Okay. All right, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.